The baseball bat came down on my Christmas tree with a sickening crack. Glass ornaments shattered across my living room floor as Officer Durrock Murrison stood there in full uniform, his badge gleaming under the Christmas lights that still flickered on the broken tree. My 7-year-old daughter Emily screamed from the top of the stairs, where she watched in absolute horror as everything we had worked so hard to create for our perfect Christmas was being systematically destroyed by a man who swore an oath to protect and serve. I had exactly 3 seconds to make a decision that would either save my family or destroy everything I had left. The cop raised his bat again, aiming for the television where our family photos sat in frames that Emily had decorated herself with glitter and stickers. Behind him, through my shattered front window, I could see his wife standing in my destroyed front yard, her HOA clipboard still clutched in her manicured hands, and she was laughing. She was actually laughing at the destruction of my home, my Christmas, and my daughter's childhood innocence. This is the story of how one entitled HOA president and her corrupt police officer husband tried to destroy my family, and how we fought back against the most insane abuse of power I have ever witnessed in my 42 years of living. I need to take you back to understand how we got to this moment of absolute chaos and destruction. What you are about to hear will shock you, enrage you, and honestly make you question everything you thought you knew about homeowners associations and the people who run them. This is not just a story about a Karen with a clipboard. This is a story about corruption, abuse of power, domestic terrorism, and ultimately justice. By the end of this story, you will understand why I now dedicate my life to exposing HOA corruption and helping other families who find themselves targeted by these petty tyrants who hide behind community guidelines while destroying lives. My name is Thomas Richardson, and in 2019, I was living what I thought was the American dream. I had moved to Pinewood Estates in suburban Georgia with my wife Sarah and our daughter Emily, who was 6 years old at the time. I worked as a software engineer for a major tech company, working remotely from home, which allowed me to be present for Emily's childhood in ways my own father never could be for me. Sarah was a pediatric nurse at the local hospital, working the night shift 3 days a week so that one of us was always home with Emily. We had saved for years to afford the down payment on our 4-bedroom colonial in this beautiful gated community. The neighborhood had mature trees, a community pool, tennis courts, and what the realtor promised was a, quote, very active and engaged homeowners association, unquote. I should have run when I heard those words, but I was naive. I thought active and engaged meant they kept the common areas nice and organized community events. I had no idea that active and engaged actually meant there was a woman who had appointed herself queen of the neighborhood and ruled with an iron fist dipped in poison. Before we go any further, if you believe in holding people like this Karen accountable, if you think that abuse of power should never go unpunished, and if you want to hear stories that prove that good people can fight back against tyranny and win, then subscribe to my channel right now. We provide daily Karen stories that expose the worst of entitled behavior and show you that justice is possible. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story, because what I am about to tell you gets so much worse before it gets better, and you will not want to miss a single detail of how this woman and her husband got exactly what they deserve. Let me tell you about Diane Murrison. The first time I met her was 3 days after we moved into our new home. I was in the front yard with Emily, teaching her how to use the leaf blower to clear the driveway because she thought it was the coolest thing she had ever seen. A white Mercedes SUV pulled up to our curb with the precision of a military vehicle, and out stepped a woman in her late 40s wearing a tennis outfit that probably cost more than my first car. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her face was frozen in an expression that I can only describe as professionally disappointed. She walked toward us carrying a leather portfolio with the words Pinewood Estates HOA embossed in gold letters, and before she even introduced herself, she said, and I quote, "That leaf blower is too loud for this time of day, and your child is not wearing shoes, which is a violation of community standards regarding appropriate outdoor attire." I stood there stunned, the leaf blower still running in my hands, while my daughter hid behind my legs. I turned off the machine and tried to introduce myself, extending my hand for a handshake, but Dawn just looked at my hand like I had offered her a dead fish. She informed me that she was the HOA president, had held the position for 9 years, and that she took community standards very seriously. She handed me a copy of the HOA guidelines, which I swear was thicker than most novels I had read, and told me that I had 30 days to read and memorize every rule. Then she turned on her heel and marched back to her Mercedes, but before she drove away, she rolled down her window and said, "I have my eye on you, Mr. Richardson. New residents are always the ones who cause the most trouble." And then she was gone, leaving me standing in my own driveway, feeling like I had just been visited by the neighborhood Gestapo. Over the next few months, the violations started coming. They arrived in my mailbox with the regularity of bills, each one more ridiculous than the last. I received a violation notice because my garbage cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after trash pickup, even though I had been in a work meeting, and put them away the moment it ended. I received a violation notice because the shade of white I had painted my shutters was apparently warm white, when the approved color was true white, and the difference was so subtle that I had to hold the paint samples side by side in direct sunlight to even see it. I received a violation notice because Amelie had left her bicycle in the front yard for 20 minutes while we went inside for lunch. I received a violation notice because my lawn was a quarter-inch too tall during one inspection, and then another violation notice the following week because I had cut it too short trying to avoid the first violation. It felt like no matter what I did, Dawn Morrison was watching, waiting, and looking for any excuse to slap me with another piece of paper, demanding that I correct my behavior and pay the associated fine. By the end of our first 6 months in the neighborhood, we had accumulated nearly $2,000 in HOA fines, and every single one of them felt petty, targeted, and designed specifically to break us down. The other neighbors warned me about Dawn, but always in whispers, always when they were sure she was not around to hear. My next-door neighbor, an elderly widower named Harold who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years, told me that Dawn had driven out at least 7 families in the past decade. She would target them with violations, report them to the city for any possible code issue she could fabricate, and make their lives so miserable that selling their home and moving away seemed like the only option. Harold told me that Dawn's husband Durrock was a police officer with the county sheriff's department, and that she was not afraid to use that connection to intimidate anyone who pushed back against her authority. He told me about a family 3 years earlier who had tried to fight a fine in front of the HOA board, and the next week, they found their car ticketed every single day for various parking violations that no one had ever enforced before. The father had been pulled over 4 times in 1 month for, quote, routine traffic stops, unquote, that always seemed to happen when he was on his way to work. They lasted in the neighborhood for 3 more months before they gave up and moved away. Harold looked me in the eyes when he told me this story and said, "Thomas, just keep your head down, pay the fines. Do not give her any reason to target you. It is not worth the fight." But Harold did not know me very well yet. He did not know that I had spent 6 years in the Army before going to college on the GI Bill. He did not know that I had faced down actual threats in actual combat zones, and that I was not about to be intimidated by a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and a superiority complex. That was my first mistake. Pride comes before the fall, and I was about to fall harder than I ever had in my life. The real trouble started in December when Emily asked if we could decorate the front yard for Christmas. She was so excited about the holidays, and she had seen pictures of houses with elaborate light displays and inflatable decorations, and she wanted our house to be the most magical house on the street. Sarah and I took her to the hardware store, and we let her pick out whatever decorations she wanted. She chose a 6-foot-tall inflatable Santa Claus, a snowman family with light-up scarves, and about 500 feet of Christmas lights that she wanted strung absolutely everywhere. We also bought a beautiful pre-lit Christmas tree for the front porch and dozens of ornaments that Emily picked out herself, each one with a special meaning to her. There were unicorn ornaments and princess ornaments, and one that looked like our dog Max, and one that she had made herself at school out of popsicle sticks and glitter that said, I love Mommy and Daddy in her careful first-grade handwriting. We spent an entire weekend decorating, and when we were done, our house looked like the North Pole had exploded in the best possible way. Emily was so proud. She would stand at the front window every evening after the sun went down, watching the lights twinkle and the inflatable Santa sway gently in the winter breeze, and her face would glow with pure childhood joy. It was everything Christmas was supposed to be. The first violation notice arrived on December 4th. It stated that our inflatable Santa Claus exceeded the maximum height allowed for yard decorations, which according to Section 14, subsection C, paragraph 7 of the HOA guidelines was 5 feet. Our Santa was 6 feet tall, and therefore we were in violation and subject to a $300 fine if the decoration was not removed within 72 hours. I went back and read the guidelines, and sure enough, there it was buried on page 47. A height restriction for yard decorations that I had never noticed before. But here is the thing. I drove around the neighborhood that evening and counted no fewer than 8 houses with decorations that exceeded 5 feet, including a massive 12-foot nutcracker soldier on the lawn of the HOA treasurer, who happened to be Diane's best friend. I took photographs of every single violation I could find and prepared to contest the fine at the next HOA board meeting. When I showed up at that meeting, Diane looked at me like I was something she had scraped off the bottom of her designer shoe. She listened to my presentation about the selective enforcement of the decoration height rule, looked at my photographs, and then smiled that cold, reptilian smile and said, "Those other decorations were approved through the proper variance request process." If you had read the guidelines more carefully, you would know that homeowners can apply for a variance for decorations exceeding the standard height limit. You did not apply for a variance. Therefore, you are in violation. I asked how I was supposed to know about the variance process if it was not clearly stated in the decoration section of the guidelines, and she told me that ignorance of the rules was not an excuse for breaking them. My fine was upheld by a vote of 3-0, and I was told that if the Santa was not removed by the end of the week, the fine would increase to $500. Emily cried for 2 hours when I told her we had to take down her favorite decoration. What happened next is something I will never forget as long as I live. It was December 15th, a Sunday morning, and Sarah was at work finishing up a night shift. I was in the kitchen making pancakes for Emily, who was still asleep upstairs. Through the kitchen window, I could see our front yard with the remaining decorations that we had kept within the ridiculous height restrictions. The snowman family was still there, now the centerpiece of our display since we had to remove Santa. And then I saw her. Diane Morrison was standing in my front yard at 7:30 in the morning, and she was not alone. Her husband Derek was with her, still in his pajamas but wearing his service weapon on his hip like he expected a firefight at any moment. They were both standing in front of our snowman decoration, and they were examining it with the intensity of crime scene investigators. I opened my front door and called out to ask what they were doing on my property, and Diane turned to face me with a look of pure triumph on her face. She held up her phone and showed me a photograph of our snowman family, and then she pointed to the electrical cord that connected the decoration to our outdoor outlet. "This extension cord is stretched across your lawn," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "It creates a tripping hazard and is therefore a safety violation. Additionally, I have reason to believe that this decoration is drawing more power than your outdoor outlet is rated for, which is a fire hazard. I will be reporting this to the fire marshal on Monday morning." I was speechless. The extension cord was barely visible in the grass, and it was the same type of cord that literally everyone in the neighborhood used for their outdoor decorations. But before I could even respond, something happened that still makes my blood boil to this day. Diane walked up to our inflatable snowman, pulled out a key or a knife or something sharp that I could not quite see from the porch, and she slashed it. She punctured the inflatable decoration that my daughter had picked out herself, that my daughter loved, that my daughter ran to the window every morning to see. She destroyed it right in front of me while her husband stood there with his hand on his weapon like he was daring me to do something about it. I ran toward them, shouting, asking what she thought she was doing, and Derek stepped forward and put his hand on my chest. He pushed me back and told me to calm down, that his wife was just removing a safety hazard as was her duty as HOA president. I told him that she had just committed property destruction, that I was going to call the police, and he laughed in my face. He actually laughed and said, "I am the police. Who exactly are you going to call?" Then he leaned in close, so close I could smell the coffee on his breath, and he whispered, "You think you can come into this neighborhood and disrespect my wife? You think you can challenge her authority at board meetings and embarrass her in front of her colleagues? Let me tell you something, boy. You have no idea who you are dealing with. We run this neighborhood, and we can make your life a living hell if you do not learn your place." I was shaking with anger, but I kept my composure. I stepped back, held up my hands, and told them both to get off my property immediately before this situation escalated any further. Diane picked up the deflated remains of our snowman and threw them at my feet like garbage. Then she and Derek walked back to their house 3 doors down, and I could hear her laughing the entire way. That high-pitched, cruel, victorious laugh that still echoes in my nightmares. When Emily woke up and looked out the window and saw that her snowman was gone, she was devastated. I told her that there had been an accident, that the decoration had broken, trying to protect her from the ugly truth of what had happened. But she was inconsolable. She kept asking why her snowman was gone, why Christmas was being ruined, what she had done wrong. I held her while she cried, and something inside me hardened into steel. I made a decision in that moment that I would not back down, that I would not let this woman and her corrupt husband terrorize my family, and that I would find a way to fight back even if it cost me everything. The next violation came 2 days later. This time, they claimed that our outdoor Christmas tree on the front porch was blocking the sidewalk accessibility path, even though the tree was entirely on our property and did not extend even an inch past our porch railing. The fine was $200, and the deadline to remove the tree was 48 hours. I decided not to remove it. I was done complying with arbitrary and selectively enforced rules that seemed designed specifically to target my family. I was done letting this woman steal Christmas from my daughter. I consulted with a lawyer friend from college who specialized in property law, and she told me that HOA enforcement actions were often difficult to fight, but that if I could prove a pattern of targeted harassment, I might have grounds for a lawsuit. She also told me that any physical confrontation or property destruction by HOA officials could potentially be criminal, and she advised me to start documenting everything with video cameras. I installed 4 security cameras around my property that weekend, covering every angle of my house and yard. I wanted to make sure that whatever happened next would be recorded. Christmas Eve arrived, and I thought maybe we would get a break. I thought maybe even someone as cold and cruel as Diane Morrison would have a heart during the holidays and leave us alone for one day. I was wrong. The morning of Christmas Eve, I took Emily outside to build a snow fort in the front yard. We had gotten 3 inches of snow overnight, which was rare for Georgia, and Emily was overjoyed. She wanted to build a snowman to replace the inflatable one that had been destroyed, and I thought it was a beautiful way to reclaim some of the Christmas magic that had been stolen from her. We spent 2 hours in the cold, rolling snowballs and stacking them and finding rocks for eyes and a carrot for the nose. Emily gave her snowman a scarf that she had knitted herself in her after-school craft club, and she named him Frosty Jr. because the original Frosty was his dad who had gone to the North Pole for an important meeting with Santa. It was the kind of innocent childhood fantasy that I wanted to protect forever. We went inside for hot chocolate, and Emily fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from playing in the snow. I covered her with a blanket and went to the kitchen to start preparing Christmas Eve dinner. Sarah would be home from work in a few hours, and we had planned a special meal before opening one present each, which was our family tradition. I was in the kitchen for maybe 45 minutes when I heard shouting from outside. I ran to the front door and saw something that made me feel like I was losing my mind. Diane Morrison was in my front yard again, but this time she was not just taking photographs or making threats. She was physically destroying my daughter's snowman. She was kicking it and stomping on it, reducing Frosty Jr. to a pile of trampled snow. And she was laughing. That same cruel, mocking laugh that I had heard before. She was destroying my daughter's creation and enjoying every second of it. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what she was holding in her other hand. She had a bag, a large plastic garbage bag, and through the clear plastic I could see bright colors and familiar shapes. She had taken Emily's outdoor toys, the sled that Santa was supposed to have brought her, the snow boots that we had left on the porch to dry, and I could see the edge of something else in the bag, something that made my heart stop. It was the popsicle stick ornament, the one Emily had made at school, the one that said, "I love Mommy and Daddy." Diane had stolen my daughter's handmade ornament from our porch Christmas tree. I stormed outside, shouting at her to stop, to get off my property, to put down my daughter's things. Diane just smiled at me and said that she was collecting evidence of fire hazards and safety violations, that she was within her rights as HOA president to remove dangerous items from common areas. I told her that my yard was not a common area, that it was my private property, and that she was committing theft and trespassing and destruction of personal property. She looked at me with those cold, dead eyes and said, "Try to prove it. My husband will be happy to take your statement at the police station. I am sure he will give it all the attention it deserves." Then she walked away with the bag of my daughter's things, and I could hear Emily's voice behind me asking what was happening, why the snowman was broken, why the mean lady had her stuff. I turned around and saw my daughter standing in the doorway in her pajamas, tears streaming down her cheeks, and I felt a rage building inside me that I had not felt since my combat deployments. But I knew that reacting with violence was exactly what they wanted. They wanted me to snap, to give Derek an excuse to arrest me, to prove that I was the problem and not them. So I took a deep breath. I picked up my daughter. I carried her inside and I called my lawyer. What happened that night, Christmas Eve, was the most terrifying experience of my life. Sarah had just gotten home from work, and I had told her everything that had happened. She was furious but also scared. She knew what Derek Morrison was capable of, and she worried that fighting back would only make things worse. We had put Emily to bed with promises that Santa would make everything better, that Christmas morning would be magical despite what had happened. We had stayed up late arranging presents under the tree, eating the cookies that Emily had left for Santa, and trying to salvage some holiday spirit from the wreckage of the past few weeks. It was around 11:30 at night when we heard the first crash. It came from the front of the house, the sound of breaking glass and splintering wood. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept in the bedroom closet and told Sarah to call 911 while I went to investigate. I should have waited for the police. I should have stayed upstairs with my family where it was safe. But all I could think about was protecting my home, my wife, my daughter, everything I had worked so hard to build. I came down the stairs to find Derek Morrison standing in my living room. He was in full uniform, his badge glinting in the light from the Christmas tree, and he was holding a baseball bat of his own. He had smashed through my front window to get inside, and he was standing among the broken glass like he owned the place. Behind him, through the shattered window, I could see Diane standing in the snow, that clipboard clutched in her hands, watching everything unfold like it was a show put on for her entertainment. Derek looked at me with pure hatred in his eyes and said, "Your wife just called 911 reporting a break-in at this address. Good. They will send deputies to arrest you for assaulting a police officer." I told him he was insane, that I had not touched him, that I was just standing at the top of my own stairs in my own house. He smiled and raised his bat over my Christmas tree, the tree that Emily had helped decorate, the tree with all her special ornaments that we had carefully protected, and he said, "By the time they get here, you will have." Then he swung. The bat connected with the top of the tree and sent the angel flying across the room. Ornaments shattered and scattered across the floor. The lights flickered and went dark. He swung again and again, destroying everything, the presents underneath, the tree skirt that had belonged to my grandmother, the carefully wrapped gifts that held Emily's dreams for Christmas morning. I heard my daughter scream from upstairs, and I saw Sarah at the top of the stairs holding her back, both of them crying as they watched this uniformed monster destroy our home. And through it all, I could hear Diane laughing outside, that high, cruel, victorious laugh that seemed to go on forever. Derek turned toward the television stand where our family photos sat, the pictures of Emily as a baby, our wedding photo, the portrait we had taken last Christmas when everything was still good, and he raised his bat again. I knew that if I did not do something, he would destroy those too, and then he would claim that I had attacked him, and I would spend Christmas in jail while my family was left unprotected. What saved me was the cameras. The security cameras that I had installed just a week earlier were recording everything, every swing of the bat, every crash of breaking glass, every word that Derek said, every laugh that Diane let out. And the moment the sheriff's deputies arrived in response to Sarah's 911 call, they saw the footage. They saw their fellow officer standing in my destroyed living room with a weapon in his hand. They saw the timeline of events that proved he had broken into my home and initiated the destruction. They saw Diane Morrison outside directing the attack like some kind of twisted conductor. And they saw me, standing at the bottom of my stairs, having never thrown a punch or raised a hand or done anything except try to protect my family from a home invasion committed by someone who was supposed to uphold the law. The next few hours were chaos. More officers arrived. Internal Affairs was called. Derek tried to spin the narrative, claiming that I had attacked his wife earlier that day and that he was just responding to a threat. But the security footage told a different story. It showed Diane destroying my daughter's snowman unprovoked. It showed her stealing Emily's belongings. It showed Derek smashing through my window and systematically destroying my home while I stood frozen in shock. The deputies who arrived were not part of Derek's inner circle. They were honest cops who were horrified by what they saw on those recordings. By 3 in the morning on Christmas Day, Derek Morrison was in handcuffs in the back of a patrol car, and Diane Morrison was being questioned about her involvement in the conspiracy to harass and intimidate my family. Emily woke up on Christmas morning to a living room that looked like a war zone. There was broken glass everywhere. The tree was destroyed. The presents were ruined. Sarah and I had done our best to clean up the worst of it, but there was no hiding what had happened. Emily looked at the destruction and then looked at me with those big, innocent eyes and asked if the bad people had tried to steal Christmas. I told her yes, but that Christmas was not about presents or trees or decorations. Christmas was about family and love, and the bad people could never steal that no matter how hard they tried. She thought about that for a moment and then hugged me and said, "I love you, Daddy." And in that moment I knew that we were going to be okay. It would take time to heal, but we would survive this, and we would be stronger for it. The legal process that followed was extensive and complicated. Durek Morrison was charged with breaking and entering, destruction of property, assault, and abuse of power under color of authority. The last charge was particularly serious and carried significant penalties for law enforcement officers who used their badge to commit crimes. He was immediately suspended from the sheriff's department pending the investigation, and when the full scope of his behavior came to light, he was terminated without pension. It turned out that we were not his only victims. Other families in the neighborhood started coming forward with stories of intimidation and harassment. The elderly widower Harold, who had warned me about keeping my head down, finally felt safe enough to share his own experiences. A young couple who had moved away 2 years earlier returned to give depositions about how Durek had pulled them over repeatedly and threatened them with arrest on fabricated charges. A business owner in town revealed that Diane had threatened to have Durek make his life difficult if he did not give her a discount on her regular purchases. The pattern of abuse was staggering, spanning nearly a decade of unchecked corruption. Diane Morrison was charged with conspiracy, theft, destruction of property, and harassment. She was also removed from her position as HOA president by a unanimous vote of the remaining board members, who were apparently just as terrified of her as everyone else, and were relieved to finally see her face consequences. The new HOA board reached out to me personally to apologize for what had happened and to offer to drop all pending fines against my family. They also implemented new rules requiring board approval before any violation notices could be issued, preventing any future president from using the position to conduct personal vendettas. It was not perfect, but it was progress. The civil lawsuit that followed was even more satisfying. My lawyer filed claims against both Durek and Diane Morrison for intentional infliction of emotional distress, property damage, harassment, and civil rights violations. We also filed a claim against the county sheriff's department for failing to properly supervise and discipline Durek despite numerous red flags in his behavior over the years. The case took 18 months to work its way through the courts, but in the end, we were awarded $340,000 in damages. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life, but honestly, it was not about the money. It was about justice. It was about proving that people like Durrock and Diane Morrison could not terrorize innocent families and get away with it. It was about showing Emily that the world was not as hopeless as it sometimes seemed, that the good guys could win if they refused to give up. Durrock Morrison was convicted on multiple felony charges and sentenced to 7 years in state prison. The judge who sentenced him said that he had betrayed the sacred trust placed in law enforcement officers, and that his actions had done immeasurable damage to the relationship between police and the communities they serve. Diane Morrison received a suspended sentence due to her lack of prior criminal record, but she was ordered to complete 200 hours of community service and to stay away from our family under a permanent restraining order. The last I heard, she and Durrock had divorced. She had moved to another state, and she was living in an apartment complex with no HOA. Karma, as they say, is a beautiful thing. Today, 3 years later, we still live in the same house.